Hello and welcome to the Gaggle Wobble Challenge, and if necessary, destroy media narratives. I'm George Szamuely. With me today, of course, is co-founder of the Gaggle, Peter Lavelle. So, Peter, the Polish Parliament the other day has decreed that July the 11th will be a day to commemorate the massacre at Volhinya in World War II, which took place in 1943 and 44. And specifically, the Volhynia massacre was carried out by OUN-B, which was the organization founded and led by Stepan Bandera. And the OUN-B was, of course, the Banderaites. And one should remember that, of course, the Bandera's organization was founded during the time when what is now known as Ukraine was under the control of Poland, and indeed the target of the terrorist activities of OUN-B was initially the Poles, and then it moved on to the Russians. Now, this, of course, raises a number of issues, one of which is why exactly is Poland firmly supporting Ukraine when the people who are running Ukraine are people who celebrate the life and achievements of Stepan Bandera. I mean, if Poland wants to look the other way, then he can look the other way. But Poland doesn't want to look the other way. It's actually declared that this is a genocide. And I just show you this the announcement from the Polish government. And here we have on June the 4th, 2025, the Sejm of the Republic of Poland passed an act establishing July the 11th as the National Day of Remembrance of Poles, victims of genocide committed by the OUN and UPA, that's the Ukrainian People's Army, in the eastern territories of the Second Polish Republic. It wasn't really the Second Polish Republic at the time, but the Poles insist on that. And then here's the actual proclamation. In the years 1939 to 46, Ukrainian nationalists from the OUN, Ukrainian Insurgent Army, and other Ukrainian nationalist formations operating in the eastern borderlands of the Second Polish Republic, Volhynia, Tarnopol, blah, blah, and the current Lublin and Subcarpathian voivodeship committed genocide against the Polish population. They murdered over 100,000 Poles, mainly rural residents, destroyed their property, and led to the exile of hundreds of thousands of Poles from the eastern borderlands of the Second Polish Republic. The apogee of this crime fell on July 1943, and the symbolic date of the hecatomb of Poles at the hands of Ukrainian nationalists is July the 11th, 1943, when Poles were murdered in about 100 towns. Martyrdom resulting from belonging to the Polish nation deserves to be remembered in the form of a day recognized annually by the Polish state, on which tribute will be paid to the victims. And so here then is Article 1, July the 11th is established as the National Day of Remembrance of Poles, victims of genocide. And then Article 2, the National Day of Remembrance of Poles, victims of genocide. And then Article 3, the act shall enter into force on the day following the date of its publication. One should say that the Parliament passed this unanimously. Not one vote was against it. Here the Ukrainians were naturally not very happy about this. Hey, these are our great allies, and they're accusing us of committing genocide. So it says the Ministry of Foreign Affairs of Ukraine considers the decision of the Sejm of the Republic of Poland to establish July 11th as the Day of Remembrance for the victims of the so-called genocide committed by OUN and the Ukrainian Insurgent Army, to fly in the face of the spirit of good neighborly relations between Ukraine and Poland. Such unilateral steps do not contribute to achieving mutual understanding and reconciliation, which our countries have been working on for a long time,
Really? They've been working on it for a long time?
Well, they've been talking about this for some time, um, about this, uh, digging up these bodies of massacre victims and then returning them to Poland. But this has been ongoing for years and years without much success because Ukrainians weren't very enthusiastic about digging anything up and
Yeah, well,
returning
that
them to Poland.
the reason why I brought it up is this is not mutual understanding and reconciliation.
No, I don't
This,
think so.
this is buying political support. Okay.
Exactly. And says in the format of the joint Ukrainian-Polish working group on historical issues, which operates with the participation of the ministries of culture and national memory from both countries. Ukraine consistently advocates for scientific and unbiased study of the complex pages of our shared history. We are convinced that the path to true reconciliation lies through dialogue, mutual respect, and joint work by historians rather than through unilateral political assessments.
Well, that's just pablum. I'm sorry. Okay.
But you see, the interesting thing,
That's just let's just move on. That's all that's saying.
right, exactly. But that's the thing in Poland, the previous government in Poland, they presented Germany with this bill for the World War II damages, and some, I don't know, what, 1 trillion
Yeah,
euros,
yeah.
I think, something like that. And then Germany said, nah, you're not getting anything. Zip, zero. I mean, we're not even going to negotiate a sum with you. Just you're not getting anything. So it's very strange. I mean, Poland kind of presents these things, with these great allies, Germany and Ukraine, and Poland sort of presents each with a bill. Um, so, and so we urge the Polish side to refrain from steps that could lead to increased tensions in bilateral relations and undermine the achievements gained through constructive dialogue and cooperation.
Okay, well, let me interpret that last part here. Okay, and undermine the achievements gained through constructive dialogue and cooperation between Ukraine and Poland. No, you all hate the Russians. That's the only
That's
thing you're
it.
talking. That's
Exactly.
the only thing you're talking about.
Yes, exactly. That's what it is. It's that they just hate the Russians. Say, wait, why can't we just sort of put all these things
Yeah.
on the back burner and focus on hating the Russians? But it does raise the important issue, which is, well, if the Bandera people did these terrible things to you, why are you so unsympathetic to the Russian position? This is what the Russians have been saying all
Yeah.
this time, that we really cannot live with this Banderite regime in Kiev. So and these are your allies. Despite the bias and political context of the Sejm of the Republic of Poland's decision, we continue to conduct search and exhumation work in, in Ukraine and Poland. We have already achieved practical results in this area, which should be developed further in the future.
Well, I mean, I'm sorry. But again, this is pablum. Okay, you can exhume bodies, but who killed them? I mean, you're sidestepping
Right.
the real issue here is responsibility.
Right. Right. Um, well, that's right. I mean, I mean, the problem with the Poles, of course, what Ukrainians did was terrible. But the problem is the Poles themselves had behaved, really, really badly towards the Ukrainians during the era in which they essentially took this territory, took a part of Ukraine following the Treaty of Riga, and embarked on this course of Polonization, which didn't go down very well with the population. And what happens then is, of course, there's a moment of reckoning, and that came during World War II. Um, and so, and then once again, we remind you that Poles should not look for enemies among Ukrainians, and Ukrainians should not look for enemies among Poles. Yeah, we have a common enemy. Russia! For the sake of the common strength, freedom, and security of our two friendly countries, we must resolve problematic issues together rather than exacerbating them. The, the and this is a story from TVP. There's a Polish television, and this just simply reports it. This is the 100 Polish villages, resulting in death of thousands of civilians. And then the law states that more than 100,000 Poles were murdered, describes as acts of genocide. And then they describe again the response of the Ministry of Foreign Affairs. And that's our enemy is the same.
Yeah, but see, go back. That's right. Our enemy is the same. Russia sees the Banderites as an enemy too. So square the circle for me, please. No, because this is a ethno nationalistic, fascistic movement and belief system.
Right.
That's what this is.
Right. Well, that's right. That's right. But that's the interesting thing that Poland embraced the cause of Ukraine. And of course, Germany was also embraced the cause of Ukraine. The German case is always a little more sinister because, of course, the Germans know very well, and Merz and all the rest of them know exactly what happened in World War II. They know exactly about Owenbear. They know exactly who was behind Owenbear, and that these massacres that were carried out by the Banderites, that was because the Banderites were provided with weaponry and everything by the Nazis. They were acting as auxiliaries of the Nazis. The Germans know all this, and yet once again
Well,
they're
I mean,
aligning themselves with these people.
and the Germans know with the degree of viciousness in which these massacres were
Right.
occurred. I mean, just give them, as much as they can drink and guns and bullets, and even they were astounded
Right.
about how the ferociousness
Right.
of the ethnic cleansing that
Yeah.
was going on.
Yeah, yeah. No, that's right. Yeah, the Germans are very scummy like that. It's like when they
Yeah, yeah.
align themselves with the Croats, they know exactly who the Croats were and who the Ustasha were, and who provided the weaponry and everything to the Ustasha, who empowered the Ustasha. And then, oh well, no, we support Croatian independence. We want democracy in Croatia. The people who are in power now, they were around then. They were young then, but they were the same people. And here's Zelensky. Now Zelensky, who issued this tweet congratulating this new Polish president, the Nawrocki. The one problem is that Nawrocki is actually a kind of it's one of the bees in his bonnet is Volhinya. And so he goes, congratulations, blah, blah, Poland, which preserves the strength of its national spirits of faith in justice, blah, blah, blah. And then Nawrocki responds to Zelensky, well, thank you for your message. I'm looking forward to continue partnership of our countries based on mutual respect and understanding. I believe it requires not only good dialogue, but also solving overdue historical issues. Ooh. Um, Overdue historical issues. And so that was a clear warning for Zelensky. And then it says Nawrocki, the former head of Poland's Institute of National Remembrance, has long advocated for stronger official recognition of the Volhynia massacres. The issue remains one of the most sensitive points in Polish-Ukrainian relations. While Poland has given Ukraine significant political, military, and humanitarian aid since Russia's full-scale invasion in 2022, tensions have repeatedly surfaced, particularly around wartime memory and commemorations. Now, we're not even talking about grain and dumping of cheap grain in Poland's markets, or Ukrainian truckers not adhering to EU standards and therefore undercutting Polish truckers. But this this is kind of a real sore point for the Poles. But again, it just raises the question. So these are your allies? It's like, oh well, these very people. You set this up. It's not like, oh, well, you're just sweeping it under the rug. You created this day of remembrance specifically on this. The day was going to be a public holiday on July the 11th, for what the Bandera people did to your people, and these are your allies.
Well, he also, the new incoming Polish president, said that Poland would not support, at least at this time,
Right.
EU membership for Ukraine.
Right.
Um, a lot of people watching the many hours that George and I dedicate, might think we're kind of history wonks, and we are. But history does matter,
Oh, yeah.
okay? It does matter. And this is one of the quandaries because they're they have a mutual hatred for Russia.
Yes.
It's the only thing that keeps you. It's really kind of sad that if you base your friendship on something like that, your relationship on that,
Right.
that's thin ice. I'm sorry.
It's thin ice, but it's also very revealing, really, of the current state of Europe. So you've got the Baltic states. There doesn't seem to be anything at all to these Baltic states other than hatred of Russia. I mean, it's like, you're trying to figure out, is there a culture there? Is there a civilization? Is there anything at all to be said for any of these people other than, well, they just hate Russia. It's like that's it. They live and breathe hatred of Russia. And then you've got Poland and Ukraine, joining up with Germany, all united in hatred of Russia. And then you've got the UK as well. And so you think like, well, what is this? I mean, I don't see anything positive here. There doesn't seem any positive energy.
Well, I mean,
You're not
it's
coming up with
something.
any ideas for the future. It's just hatred of Russia.
We had that conversation on Friday with the good professor, which was really stimulating in many ways. And there were disagreements, obviously. But, it brought up, and now it's coming up in that conversation, it kind of spills over into this conversation. Okay, everybody hates the Russians, but it looks like for different reasons. Okay. I mean, and then contradictory ones. Okay. I mean, so you have the Ukrainians, the Poles, and the Germans hate the Russians. Well, that's a very interesting triage, isn't it? I
Right.
mean,
Yeah.
I mean, it's really quite remarkable. Germany should pay reparations. Germans, oh well, no, that was a long time ago. Let's move on. Okay, it was unfortunate.
Yes. No, no
It was
reparations for
it
you.
was a tough time for us too.
I love that the German argument was, well, Poland and East Germany, they signed this
What was
treaty,
it?
essentially
51,
waiving their any claims against one another.
51, 53. When was
Something
that?
like that, yeah, in the early 1950s. They just waived their claims against one another. So that's binding on us.
And that is that the state the DDR became part of West Germany. So I mean we got a clean deal here. Okay,
Yeah.
so I mean you want to sue the DDR? Go to the archive because it's gone.
Right. Yeah, that's right. It's a sort of very strange. I mean, at the
It
time,
worked out for them. It
but
worked
at
out.
the time, West Germany never did not recognize. In fact, West Germany never recognized East Germany as a real state. So it's very interesting that they now
But then
somehow
they do.
recognize that. Oh well, these treaties were signed. That's
So
pretty good.
you're saying they didn't recognize them until they did.
That's right. Yeah. Well, if you waived your claims, then you waived your claims. I mean, sorry.
But see, this is a theme that George and I have touched upon from time to time. It's really very interesting because of the post-war settlement, and then we have the Cold War, and then the end of the initial post because we're still in that post-war settlement era, but the initial part of it with the end of the Soviet Union and the dismantling of the Warsaw Pact, you still have all of these national histories that are kind of floating in the air because the Cold War, the ideological struggle, that just freezed everything. It paved over it, okay? But once that layer was lifted and disappeared, then you have these national histories again, and they're very fraught,
Right.
okay? And particularly since you have a Banderite friendly government in Ukraine, what would you expect,
Right.
okay?
Right.
And it really puts the Poles in a very, my opinion, a very awkward position because that's Russia has their position. They're the same position.
Right. Well, that's it, and that's that really gets to the heart of it, which is that this is a very this ethno-nationalist movement that Russia say we were the victims of this. This Banderets, and this happened during World War II. They carried out massacres against Russians, and of course against Poles and against Jews. These are the people we really raise objections to, and they carried it out after World War II. These are the same people who are carrying this out after World War II. But you don't recognize that. The only crime, apparently, was the crime that they committed against the Poles. Even here, I mean, in this proclamation, they don't mention crimes against anyone else. They just say, oh, these crimes that were committed against the Poles. That's the only thing that matters to them, is that what you did to the Poles.
And
Uh,
what the Poles, the Russians, and the Jews have in common is they were victims of a ethnic cleansing, which, depending on who you ask, could easily be defined as a genocide.
yeah, that's right. That's
This is one of the reasons why I lived there in Poland for 10 years, and there's a certain logic you're starting to work with, and then it just completely falls apart. Okay,
right.
so the massacre of Poles, that is an atrocity, but the massacre of Russians, well, that's a different subject.
That's
No,
it.
it's not. It's the
Exactly.
same thing.
That's it. Exactly. Yeah, exactly. That's the way. Because again, I mean, the Poles, they did some really bad things to the Ukrainians, no question. I mean, what they did to the Ukrainians during between the wars during the 1930s and after World War II, they treated the Ukrainians very, very badly. They just picked them up, and just dumped them into in another part of Poland. Boom, they just the Operation Vistula. Boom, boom, they just moved them to in another part. Lock, stock, and barrel. So the Poles certainly committed atrocities, not as bad as Volhinya, but nonetheless, but the Poles never accept. They never accept that they themselves did anything to anyone, against anyone, or anything like that. So that always, that their hands are always clean. So they come along with this self-righteous thing. Oh, this thing that was done to us, but apparently that doesn't apply to the Russians, and they don't think there's a continuity between the sort of the rabid nationalism and ethno-nationalist intolerance of those people, and the which
And
works
and
out
and
into today, and that the
and
Hungarians also complain about. They say, "Hey, we're not allowed to, enjoy our national culture in Transcarpathia."
yeah, it is a bit peculiar to say the least, is that you have Berlin and Kiev in lockstep.
Yeah,
Well, just kind of return to the old days, huh?
all right.
That's what it looks like
Yeah,
ideologically.
that's right. Exactly.
Okay.
That's
It's so unfortunate, this intentional revisionism of history, because what happened in the 1930s and 40s in the last century is still very much with us. And
right.
you can paper it over, and it's all the Russians' fault. You can do that, and you end up with very unsatisfactory results and hypocritical ones at that. Okay.
Right. What I think is slightly off topic, but I'm
But
kind of
we never
curious.
we never do that. We
We
never
never
do.
did that. But what I think was, when Chancellor Merz brought up the subject of June the 6th
Oh God.
with Trump, what do you think he meant by that?
I really have no idea, George. I mean, I was astounded by that. Okay, I really was. I mean, it's really grasping at straws
Mhm.
because I think that for Mertz, he thinks, well, Trump is an American. He's not he doesn't know history very well, even in his own country. He probably saw Saving Private Ryan,
Right,
okay, or Band of Brothers. And that's how he's trying to get into Trump's head,
right,
because it was not it was well I would say it was kind of an historical attempt to try to connect with Donald Trump.
Right,
Okay.
right.
I mean, you remember during, um, um, uh, I could never remember Jean-Pierre, somebody, what was her? I never can
Oh,
remember.
Karine Jean-Pierre.
Yeah. You know, she didn't even know what, we're celebrating June 6th with our German allies.
Right, right. See,
There she was making history again. She was history.
but I kind of wonder though what exactly he meant. Is that what that
Okay,
Russia,
I think it was crusade, a
right,
crusade.
a crusade against whom?
Well,
Who?
obviously, he wants to replace his country, his
Right.
nation, with the
But this is
Russians.
what I mean. Is that what he meant? He said basically
I think so.
that
Yeah.
okay, Americans invaded Europe in June the 6th, 1944, in order to liberate Europe from Nazi Germany, and Russia is essentially today Nazi Germany.
Yes.
That's what you
Yes.
think. Well, I was thinking that's how I kind of read it, but now thinking about it, was it could he also have been suggesting that back in June the 6th, 1944, the real enemy was even then the Russians? That was that he was trying to liberate Europe from the Russians. That was it was an attempt to save Europe from the Russians.
Well, okay. And now we go, this is a expedition, which could probably go nowhere because we don't have enough data points. But if you look deep into the bowels of
Right.
the archives, yeah, the Soviet Union was the second enemy.
Right.
Okay. But I think we're reading way too many
Well,
levels.
I know that's why, because initially I thought it, okay, he obviously says that you were liberating, from Nazi Germany, and now the new Nazi Germany is Russia. But then I thought, yeah, maybe it's something a little bit more than that. With these Germans, they're kind of fairly devious. They're always devious, and they're not as obvious as you think. And that he was suggesting that really the real enemy then wasn't really Germany. Germany was already Nazis; they were already defeated. The real enemy was the Russia, and that's what
Yeah,
you were
but
doing.
that speaks much less of Trump's sensibility than it does of Mertz's, okay? Because then then maybe we have been made a fool of our entire life, that the Germans are repentant and they've come to terms with their history. Well, that's in question right now. I mean, Annalena 360 Baerbock, her rhetoric. Okay, Merz now, this is the most aggressive rhetoric from a German chancellor since
Yes,
we've had since Adolf Hitler.
yes,
So George is positing a very valid question. Is so things really haven't really changed
all
that
right.
much. The
No,
makeup the makeup is coming off,
yes,
okay,
yes.
and maybe they feel okay about it now.
I think so. I think so. I think it was always there was always
Oh,
kind of a
Hitler was just a bit excessive. That's
exactly.
all.
That
He
was
was
always
just a bit excessive.
That's right. There was always that subtext with the way Germans acted. They couldn't obviously defend Hitler, but they always were suggesting, yeah, but the real enemy was the Soviet Union, and then that's what had to be done. We had to save Europe from the real enemy, which was Soviet Russia, and so there's always been that subtext. Yeah, of course, yeah, Hitler, no, bad, very bad, very bad, but really, that even nowhere near as bad as Stalin, nowhere near as
Well, I mean,
bad as the Soviet Russia.
this is it brings up a really kind of a historical quandary here because you can see with this revisionism is that the real crime of Nazi Germany was the Holocaust. The rest of the agenda was, it's acceptable.
Right,
Let me give you an example. Napoleon. It's just too bad he didn't succeed. I mean, because he was a person of the Enlightenment, and he was
right,
trying to bring it to the savage Russians and all of that. But his hubris got to him. Okay, Hitler's not much different. He was trying to bring the Enlightenment to Russia, to the Soviet Union. You can see how people are trying. They're molding this. They're
right.
massaging this. this narrative here. The Holocaust is something that, because of the real political realities of the relationship between the West and Israel, the
Right.
Holocaust is something that they.
It's a separate issue, but that's why the you always have to keep in mind that that in a way the World War II was never really finished, because the only way that you could win that war was through Soviet Russia, and therefore this is always this sore point for the West all these years, which is ultimately we never really got the job done, because we could only win this war with the Soviet Russia, and the price we had to pay was the presence of Soviet Russia in Europe. And so therefore it was just an unfinished, the war was unfinished, because and there were plenty of people in Germany who were saying it, hey, the outcome is worse than had it been gone the other way, because now we've got the Soviets in half of Europe, and the Soviets, they're barbarians, they're Asiatics, and blah blah blah. You would have been better off, had the war gone the other way. So there was always this subtext. Germans wouldn't say this explicitly, but you always felt that's kind of what they were saying. There were plenty of people in the West who also said that, hey, the wrong side won. It would have been better had it gone the other way.
Exactly, and that's why we mentioned in our previous video, is that's why the Helsinki process was so important to the Soviets, because that was one way, at least in the mind of the Soviet leadership, was to finally come to some kind of consensus of the outcome of the Second World War, which what we call them neocons now, but the neocons in the West were just beside themselves. No, we cannot accept this as a consensus of the outcome.
No.
Okay, and we know this now historically, because as soon as the Warsaw Pact came to an end, that's when they started their
Oh,
very
exactly,
frontal
exactly.
attack.
The
Okay,
project, the project, which was put in abeyance in
exactly,
1945, it was resumed in 1991. So yeah,
exactly.
absolutely, yeah, that's right,
So,
and that's why,
so
yeah, yeah. No, I was just to say that's why I think Merz was actually rather more sinister than initially we thought he was. So I mean, that was bad enough for him to
yeah,
suggest.
but George, if it's true, and I think this is a fascinating theory, but what does that mean for the rest of Europe?
Right,
I mean, the project, the Hitlerian project of the 30s and 40s, actually has some kind of historical validity.
right,
I mean, the implications of which are really, they're it's mind-boggling when you
right,
think about it. Because if you say the wrong side
right,
won, then the occupation, brutal
right.
occupation of Eastern European
Right.
countries was justified. Because I mean, you start going around in circles.
Yeah,
This
yeah,
is
no, no, I agree. You remember that time when Yatsenyuk was interviewed by German television, and he said something like, "Well, you Germans, you experienced how terrible the Russians were in 1945, when they invaded your country." Remember when he said something like that on German? And the German kind of the interviewers were a little puzzled by it, but they didn't say anything, but they were a little puzzled by what is Yatsenyuk meant by that. But for Yatsenyuk, this was, of course, perfectly sensible. Germany was invaded by the Soviet Union, so what terrible people the Russians are.
Yeah, but again with the good professor on Friday, I asked him about British Russophobia, and he wasn't particularly comfortable with. He smiled. Okay, maybe that was going into too deep of waters for the end of our conversation. But doesn't it really tell us something, George, that this isn't about politics.
Mm.
This isn't about ideology. It's about colonialism.
Something like that. I think
No, because look at it, everyone. If you think about it, the Russian landmass, and you can, if you want to use the imperial period, or you want to use the Soviet Union, or you want to
right,
use Russia today, whatever
right,
geography you want to think of,
right,
it's the largest landmass in the world, populated
right.
anyway, that was never colonized by the West. That's interesting.
Yeah.
It's like the one that got away.
Right, right. No, I think that's very much the case. And I thought that I was a little surprised that he didn't really want to go into the deeper historical questions. I thought that, well, don't you want to go into the 19th century and all the clashes between the British and the Russians, with the empire and this constant British fear that the Russians had ambitions to seize the British empire from the British. But he didn't really want to go there. And but
Yeah, but but just the default position, it's an elite problem. That wasn't satisfactory.
no,
So,
exactly. It clearly has strong historical antecedents. This and really, if you think about what happened in World War One, it was quite astonishing that the British and the Russians found themselves on the same side. You would never have expected it, if you looked at the history of the previous 100 years, to think that somehow the British and the Russians would end up on the same side against the Germans, because everything would suggest that the British and the Russians would go to war against one another.
that's right, right. Nothing clear cut here,
Right.
everybody. But I mean, I'm glad George you brought it up this morning, but also, but I mean, you know, the world according to Mertz, kind of odd.
Very, very, very.
And the thing is that he postulated his theory to the wrong guy because Trump has no interest in these things
No,
whatsoever.
no, no,
Okay.
no, no.
I
Uh,
mean, I wouldn't be surprised. Like, when you got reunified, were there any good golf courses in the East? I mean, did anybody snap them up? Maybe I
but
missed
but
something.
Trump was actually quite funny when he brought up June the 6th. They said, "Well, that wasn't a very good time for you." And of course, then the Germans immediately go into the whole pious thing. Oh, well, it was very good because we were liberated from the Nazism. Yeah, no, it was a very good time for you. But that was just Trump saying, yeah, yeah, must have been pretty terrible for you.
Well, I mean, you don't want to read too much into it, but I mean, wonky people like us can say, "You Nazis" to him. But that's kind of, you can. It's not firm, but
Right,
I mean, you considering the way Trump speaks, it's really unclear
right.
what he means by these things. But it wasn't good for you. You,
Right, exactly. But whenever Trump says these things, you always say, well, there's some truth there. That he kind of has a way of blurting things out, that there is some truth to that, which is why Mertz got very uncomfortable with this comment. Oh, must have been really bad for you. You must have felt really terrible. And of course, ultimately, you say, well, I bet your parents, I mean, if your parents were around then, or your grandparents, they couldn't have been very happy. So yes,
well,
that
I mean,
was fair.
particularly if they were Nazis.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah, that's right.
This is not going to go away. The more people play with this revisionist card, the more it comes back and bites you in the ass. I'm sorry, but it's true. It's really true. We look at this ridiculous quandary that the Poles have now carrying. Oh my
Right.
God. And the Russians are on the sideline, like, yeah, yeah.
Exactly. But yes, yes. Hey, yeah. Didn't we tell you this? Isn't that what we've been telling you since 2014? And thanks to the coup that you were involved in, you, Radek Sikorski, who's a member of this same government now, you were involved in that. You were there. You were in Kiev, and now, oh, whoa, whoa, but Bandera, oh, that's terrible.
Sikorsky, he not only opened the door, he put down the red carpet for these
Exactly.
people. Okay. And the Poles are upset about their history. Well, why don't you think about what happened, the Poles did in 2014? Okay.
Yeah,
Because you brought them back to life. You resuscitated them.
yeah.
Because I've mentioned this before. Going before 2014, I traveled very often to Ukraine, and I saw this the tattoos, and
Right,
it was just so weird, George, to see it in the 20th century in a country that was so victimized by the Nazis,
right.
and people, oh, we don't take them seriously. It's not a big deal, really.
Yeah.
When you see people sporting in a muscle shirt, Waffen SS, you take it seriously, and you should. Okay.
Exactly.
All
Exactly.
right. History never sleeps here.
No, never.
History
On
never
the
sleeps.
gaggle, never.
Okay. All right, everybody, we're going to wrap this up here. This is Goggle with Peter and George. We're on Local, so please go to thegoggle.locals.com. My buddy's coming right now. He knows we're done. We're going to do a live stream at 10 o'clock Eastern time. Please join us. We've had a pretty good run, I would say, lately.
Lately.
Okay.
Yeah.
Then
That's
George goes out solo on Tuesday.
Tuesday, 3 p.m. Eastern Time. Please join me. And please join us tomorrow, 10 a.m. Eastern Time. And then, Buddy is now weighing in. Yeah, history never sleeps. And that means that the tip jar history has to be recorded and commented upon. And, Buddy's comments on that are usually not fit for a family show. And so, but, to interpret that in polite language, we need money in that tip jar. We need, coins, silver, gold, crypto, everything in that tip jar. We're very grateful for all of your help, friendship, and support. The more you're able to donate, the more of these videos we can make, the more we can work on the technology, and above all, we'll try and get Buddy to speak in a more civilized, uh, Booth way. So remember, if you like the gaggle, please like, share, and subscribe. See you soon. Bye bye.